As I expected, being the last one of the day before going in the big room, not as big of a crowd. But so I'm Jim Sangster from Mirantis. As a quick question of the folks in the room, how many are using OpenStack in some way, shape, or form today? Okay. And how many are considering, thinking about it? And then others, I'm assuming, haven't yet. All right. So as the leading provider in this space, we've done quite a bit of this since the beginning. And actually, a lot of the customers that Jonathan shared this morning from the OpenStack Foundation, those are actually Mirantis customers, such as VW, AT&T, and many of the others that he brought up. However, while OpenStack has been game-changing and really can provide an AWS-like private cloud, all based on open source, the clear winner in this space overall, there is a dilemma. And as we talk to customers and if we've deployed with hundreds of customers, these are some of the constant themes. We hear back from the customers, it requires teams of engineers that are intimate in all the inner workings of OpenStack itself and how to operate it. And it's a very large and complex distributed system. If you saw some of the demos from Mark Shuttleworth, including talking about how to simplify things, you could see there are dozens of components in a large distributed system, and the larger that cluster is, whether it's dozens of systems, hundreds of systems, or many racks of systems, that scales, and you end up having many, many, many pieces of this large distributed system. So yes, inherently it is complex. And upgrading has notoriously been difficult in OpenStack when you move from one release to another. And for those of you that have been following or using OpenStack, the OpenStack community releases 2 major releases a year, following on in letter increments like Mitaka and so forth. And so then taking in that next big release into the customer environment has typically been a challenge. And so some of these challenges have been warranted. So I want to share a couple of different ways that we are simplifying these things across the board to make it as we go from a few years ago, where the only people really using OpenStack were these large-scale providers that did have massive engineering teams that they could throw at it, and increasingly moving more toward enterprises wanting to have a on-premises open source-based cloud, but not necessarily have these teams that need to get into that level of detail. So first off, I want to talk about simplifying the lifecycle management. So one thing is, how easy can we make it to install on day one? Or maybe you can even pay for somebody like Mirantis to install it on day one. But what happens after that? It's kind of like when you have your first child, for those of you that have children, you're in the hospital, you have the baby, everything seems great, there's all these doctors and nurses, and then you go home. And unless you have like in-home care, you're kind of at home with your baby for the first time and you go, now what? It's day 2. That's what it feels like quite a bit. So there's another thing that's been going on, and a lot of you have probably heard about DevOps, and there's been a lot of discussions weaving in and out of today's conversations that I've heard about developers really driving the adoption of these new technologies. And if we look at this, there is a legacy deployment model for software, and there's what we're calling a forward-leaning model that we are aggressively moving toward. And what the underlying principle is match what the developers are doing. And you've heard some of the other presentations today discuss some topics about how important developers are. The whole movement of containers, for example, is around developer being able to containerize things, including all the dependencies, and make it very, very easy to control what's going on and then be able to deploy that model ubiquitously. So the legacy model is that software companies, and I'm not trying to pick on any here, this is how Mirantis used to do it too. So software companies will work on a technology, in VMware's case like vSphere, and they will work on that for a very, very long time. Somewhere between 1 and 3 years. They will rigorously test it in all sorts of corner cases, for all sorts of use cases, for all sorts of applications. and as well they should in that world. And it's then released to the world, and customers, the IT teams, then go update the infrastructure, and it's a very heavy lift. It's typically planned out, everything's shut down, everything's brought on, and it's a very heavy migration from the old to the new. And then once it's running, you don't touch it for a long time. And you do it again, rinse and repeat, again and again and again. Meanwhile, the development teams are trying to build apps as fast as they can, and they want to be able to bring on new features and new technologies and take advantage of all this open source movement as fast as possible. So we've changed this paradigm, and as we look at open communities producing open code, OpenStack, OpenContrail, Kubernetes, Linux, you name it, it's still predominantly released in this old world. And so did we as a company. But we're moving more toward a model of being able to create CI/CD systems, continuous integration and continuous delivery, and connect that all the way to the customer. So we're going to be producing testing packages in containers themselves, and we're going to test in staging and then push it right into production on the customer site. So that's very different than packaging up one entire release of software that then goes to a customer on a every other year basis. What's more important here, though, is the monitoring and updating. So being able to monitor all these pieces that are continuously coming in to understand what's going on, potentially roll back to previous micro versions of this. And I'll give a picture of what I mean here. And then that much more matches to what the DevOps teams are already doing. That's what they're doing with their apps. This is actually matching the infrastructure software underneath to what they are already doing. Our big customers have been begging for this type of thing. And that's what drove us to this model. So that drives new requirements for the architecture. So on the OpenStack side, it's really getting to continuous integration of all that technology. Then it's getting to treating infrastructure as code. And although Mark Shuttleworth didn't use those words, a lot of the examples he was showing in his demos really were that, treating the infrastructure as code itself, as an entire system, and then being able to continuously deliver that into the customer environment. And then to make it very, very simple for lifecycle management over time, we're containerizing the OpenStack control plane itself. And I'll talk about that in a second and why that's important. So the way it ends up looking is we end up having a CI/CD system. And we already do this internal to Mirantis. But as I said, we're going to be connecting this CI/CD system all the way out to and through our customers. So that's what's represented by this, what kind of looks like a subway system here. And the blue is what goes on inside Mirantis. So we take our infrastructure, so OpenStack, our telemetry, Stacklight, Murano, which is the app layer, and Ceph for storage and other technologies. We're continuing to build it, to test it, to stage it, and so forth. And then we're producing artifacts, which is the external repository where it can then get picked up by a customer. So this is a CI/CD system in and of itself, and we're continuing to do this. And consider that one kind of, if this is like a set of gears, that's the gear that's spinning around the fastest. We're constantly doing this internally at Mirantis. When we get to the next color, this is then going to a CI/CD system on premises at the customer. So we're literally connecting this CI/CD system on premises here, and it's grabbing from the artifacts being produced coming out of Mirantis. The next step in red there, if there's any specific customizations and integrations that the customer has done, those are then brought in as well and all integrated together continuously. And then it goes through the rest of the customer's CI/CD system into staging, and if it passes all the validation, promote it into production. So we're going from basically from the factory all the way out to the customer's production facility in an integrated CI/CD system. And kind of the gear thing I talked about, the gear on the left is going to be spinning around real fast, and then the customer's promotion into production much slower. Like chug, 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 chug. So this is the model that we see as very prevalent in the open source world of how new infrastructure is going to be deployed. And this is what we've been working on and soon to be bringing out to our customers. While we're at it, we talked about, and I mentioned the containerization of the platform itself. And this is what we've been working together with Intel and Google on, and what we refer to as MCP, so Mirantis Cloud Platform. We've talked about this at the OpenStack Foundation, the OpenStack Summits and so forth back in Austin, which was the last one. This is what it looks like in a stack diagram here. You have the physical hosts on the bottom, and we are then running Kubernetes as the substrate. And Kubernetes from Google, as we heard, if you saw any of the other presentations, and Mark was in here a couple hours ago, even demonstrating Kubernetes, this then orchestrates containers. And I'm going to talk about the middle first. We are taking what I started off with, that complex distributed system of OpenStack, many dozens of pieces, and we're putting them all in containers managed by Kubernetes. What does that do? All the interdependencies between those are now known and housed inside the containers. That's what they're great for. I can now move and upgrade them independently. So it makes that day 2 life cycle. When you come home with the baby, it's making it much, much easier to upgrade over time, as opposed to this big monolith that you attempt to upgrade a couple times a year on an aggressive schedule. Now together, what we can do is, with Kubernetes on the bottom, containerizing the control plane to simplify lifecycle management, I can run VMs, which is what OpenStack is most known for. On top of Kubernetes, I can directly run containers. And on the far left, Ironic is the project inside OpenStack that allows us to orchestrate and run bare metal. So now, with one very effective substrate, with one orchestration engine, I can have bare metal VMs and containers all together, very elegantly, with lifecycle management to upgrade this very, very easily over time. So this is what we call MCP. We've made a recent acquisition that's accelerating our schedule here. We've been aggressively working with both Intel and Google in the upstream communities to do this. And we will be able to get this in customers' hands this quarter and full shipping GA next quarter. So it's been quite exciting as we do this. So what's changed overall as we simplify this environment? So OpenStack services are packaged inside, technically it's Docker containers run by Kubernetes, delivered continuously all the way out to the customer on their production side. One solution for all 3 flavors of the infrastructure that customers want to run. And then of course, we can run Kubernetes natively. And that's a difference than right now. Yes, OpenStack does support running Kubernetes, but basically you're running containers inside the VMs. So while it works, it's kind of belts and suspenders type of scenario. So this gives you the native Kubernetes right on top. Any questions here? I'm going to jump to a next category. So any questions on lifecycle management and the CI/CD system before I go to the next topic?
Adding Kubernetes adds redundancy?
It does. Actually, good point. I didn't mention that. So part of what Kubernetes does is understanding of the dependencies and what happens about scale and availability. So if components fail, more will be started. Or if you need more scale and performance is not meeting, it will automatically start more. So that is one of the benefits of having Kubernetes as the substrate underneath OpenStack or something like OpenStack. It doesn't have to be OpenStack. So good point. So let's talk about operations now as well. So as I mentioned, a lot of times the customers don't necessarily have, or in some cases don't even want to have, that expert operations team. They would rather focus on the DevOps. And actually, frankly, that's probably, if you've got a dollar to spend, that's the place to spend it. If the more you start spending in other areas that aren't really driving your business forward, the less you're able to really go out ahead of your competition. And so we're also focusing here. Our focus as a company has been traditionally to build clouds for people. But we've more recently moved into a full build, operate, and transfer model. So not only will we build OpenStack clouds for you, but we will also operate them for you 24/7 under a product that I'll share on the next few slides. And when you're ready, we have a whole plan to transfer that operations back to you, whether that be something you want to do next quarter, next year, or a long time from now. It's up to you when you would want to do that. So the offering that we have in this space is called Mirantis Managed OpenStack, or MMO for short. And so what we do are all these different capabilities. I'm going to take you through many of them on the next few slides that are providing together with you and trying to understand your business needs in how you want to have OpenStack managed for you with change management and all the different disciplines you'd expect, and given with up to 4 nines of availability. So here's how it looks at a very high level, either on premises or in a co-location provider of your choice. We have the Mirantis OpenStack software and our OSS system for providing all this capability and being able to manage it for you is called Stacklight. That provides logging, monitoring, alerting, secure access, and a number of things like that. And then remotely from Mirantis, we're providing that proactive monitoring and the alerting, all the operational management over time, the support 24/7. We have a designated customer success manager that works with you on a regular basis for update meetings and planning the maintenance windows, and they get to really understand your business that I'll touch on in a little bit. KPI reporting on a monthly basis that is delivered by the CSM to your organization, so you can deliver those up to the management. And then I touched on the service level agreements. The next level of depth on this, it ends up that what we call the managed control plane is all in green here. So we have the production control plane that's driving the entire production system, no matter how big or small it is. The staging control plane, Stacklight as the OSS system, and then staging systems. And this is actually how we are achieving, in this case, we're already starting to do that CI/CD pipeline, even though this is our current generation technology. It's not the one with Kubernetes underneath yet. That'll come next quarter. This is our current, what we call MOS, Mirantis OpenStack, the 9.x or 9.0, 9.1 version. But with that, we've got a built-in staging system, and we are using CI/CD to be able to promote things into production. And then what we call the managed nodes are in gold there. Those are all the compute nodes and all the storage nodes that you as a customer would be able to consume. Back at Mirantis, we then have some centralized functions around Stacklight, which are used to be able to provide the access, as well as centralized command and control. And then our ticketing system and how we do the change management is all integrated into our Salesforce systems, where our customers are already, even the ones that don't get managed OpenStack, they're seeing their trouble tickets and things like that. From a roles and responsibilities standpoint, we manage all the OpenStack layers. So we manage OpenStack itself, we manage Ceph storage, we manage the KVM hypervisor, Ubuntu as the host OS we're managing, either Neutron or OVS with Open Contrail as a choice here. So OVS or Open Contrail for the SDN. So this whole stripe in gray is what we're managing. Guest VMs and up, whether that's applications, PaaS platforms, or what have you, this is what the customer is then running and managing. And beneath, we have hardware, again, either in your data center or in a colo, and that is either managed by you or could be managed by a colo provider, for example, as long as we coordinate SLAs. So let's touch on the transfer portion a little bit. I mentioned it is on your terms. So the notion here is we want to train you on exactly what we've done. We don't want to just unplug our entire OSS system and say goodbye, have fun. So the point is to really teach you to use what we've been managing your cloud with for potentially years. We've also have an extensive training organization. We're #1 in OpenStack training. We're branching out with Kubernetes training that has been very happily received by many people. And then you'll move to one of the lower level SLAs that are basically support. So you'd go from managed to either a proactive, a 24/7, or even potentially a 8/5 to then have the support behind you doing the operations. Here's how it would actually look. We would plan it together, and that ends up with a transfer plan. And that again goes to, do you want to do this like a ripping off the Band-Aid? You want to do it as fast as possible to get you to manage it? Or do you want to do this kind of slow and steady? Your pick. Once we do that, as we're implementing, we would be training your staff on OpenStack. We would be training your staff on the operations tooling. And then we would be doing shadow operations to have your team show us what you're about to do. We give it the okay. We watch you do it till we're all confident that you know what you're doing. And then you get to pick which offering beneath that would you like to go to as you go from MMO to one of the other offerings. Here's the nice thing. It's with the same in-place tool chain. So we've trained you on it. It's open source in terms of Stacklight is all open source code. It's the same in-place Stacklight that's already been in use by us. It's the same in-place staging system that we've put in on day one. And it's all the documented standard operating procedures that we've been doing with you and your team for however long we've managed it for you. So we hand that over to you so you get to manage it in the same way. It's a very different thought process than the way that our competition does this. Third and last topic, simplifying the hardware deployment underneath. We can get into a dizzying array of possibilities. If you want to get to that level, you can do that, but we want to make it easy for you. So we have one standardized configuration. It's a flexible choice in hardware for either our Mirantis OpenStack or the Mirantis managed OpenStack. It can scale from small to large. There's minimum hardware specifications, so a compute node should have this amount of memory, these kind of processors, dual socket server, Intel SSDs. If you want to have more memory, if you want to have faster processors, fine, just don't go cheaper. If you want to have more storage or more compute, vice versa, you can change the ratio. And then that managed control plane, that's going to scale depending on how large the footprint of the cloud starts. And as that cloud grows over time, that managed control plane itself will also scale to accommodate the cloud. And so our architecture takes that into place or into account. And we can then work to say, this is how it should look, generally speaking. Now you can pick your brand and you can beef up things if you'd like, but we've done much of the work for you. And then we also have some pre-validated hardware options that can be able to have it come right out of, let's say, the factory that QCT has up the road here in Fremont, come out all pre-racked, ready to go. And then once it gets there, we're then dropping on the software once it's in your data center. So the way that looks, we've originally did this in what we called unlocked appliances. And we've changed that a little bit, and we're moving these as we speak to the architecture that I just spoke about on the previous slide. So a QX stack for Mirantis OpenStack. It's based on some of the systems we just heard about in the last two presentations that were in this room, if you're in here. So for the compute and the control nodes, it's using the 1U QuantaGrid DB. I'm trying to remember the D51B. I'm trying to remember. And then the storage, a 2U footprint. So from a processor, memory, and storage standpoint, a little bit lighter on the memory and processing, a lot heavier on the storage. Ceph, you want to have a lot of spindles on there. So we've optimized toward that. And then top of rack, we're using some of the quantum mesh switches and then the Cumulus networking software. So we can go with that and then have mini racks come right out of the factory, all pre-built, pre-designed and designated as we'd want to see it for that Mirantis OpenStack deployment. So the overall premise, whether you take advantage of one or all the different things I just talked about, we're trying to simplify OpenStack and make it easy to consume in one or multiple ways. In the end, we want to be able to focus on OpenStack for you and allow you to focus on the things that matter most to your business, whether that be developing apps, running apps, or what have you. You should focus on that area. So we've got the CI/CD delivery model that simplifies the lifecycle management. We have MMO that eliminates the need to actually even have an operations team that's in the intimate weeds of OpenStack. Quite happy to do that with you and for you. And then we've got the pre-validated rack deployments that reduce the risk and complexity of the hardware itself. It's predetermined for you, and you can just flexibly choose what you need. So that wraps things up. Happy to address a few questions, but want to thank you for spending the time at the end of the day here. Any questions? Say that, databases? Absolutely. So, would I use it to run my traditional vertically scaled Oracle environment that my business is counting on? That is, predominantly, and this gets into the, cattle versus pets discussion of OpenStack legacy environments. So, something like a large-scale Oracle environment traditionally is not going to be run in a OpenStack environment. Technically, can it? Absolutely. Is that going to have, that is much more kind of what I talked about, where even Oracle themselves releases something every 3 years. You're going to be rigorously getting ready to test that. You're putting high availability around that, whether you're using rack or whether you're using some kind of clustering technology. So is that the, and it's also not necessarily going to take advantage of the scaling capabilities of the cloud itself. It's not a cloud inherent or cloud native application. So technically, can it run there? Yes. Is it optimally designed for that? Not necessarily. You're going to see a lot more databases that are more open source databases, InfluxDB, MySQL, all those things all day, all the time. So it kind of depends on whether that together with the other applications around it are more of a cloud native application designed with the premise of a cloud underneath where things fail, or is it more of a legacy type environment expecting Oracle type treatment? That's kind of how I think about it, and what you'd hear about is pets versus cattle. For a cloud, you treat the applications like cattle, meaning if one goes away, it doesn't matter. In the legacy world, you treat them like pets. You meticulously care about them, and if something happens, all hell breaks loose. So it's a different paradigm. Question right behind there?
Yeah, you mentioned the unlocked appliances transitioning to
Yeah, so the unlocked appliances, the idea there was that these came, and this was originally designed with that. This came with the OpenStack software directly out of the factory. So it was the same hardware, OpenStack already preloaded on it, dropped into your data center and hooked up, and you could run on day one. And that would successfully work, but then what we invariably found was that customers would be left there with, okay, great, I just got this up and running immediately, and now I don't know what to do, which is where we've then said, it's going to be a much better proposition to the customer to really think about offering the Mirantis managed OpenStack and optimizing the design for that. Now, can you also still get these designs for Mirantis OpenStack? Yes, but we're not really positioning it as an appliance. It's not coming out with software on it from the factory. Hardware would come from the factory ready to go, and then we would remotely install, whether it's going to be managed or not. So it's slightly different, if that makes sense. A little more hand-holding. With that, I got the hook from the back of the room, and I think there's the second fireside chat starting momentarily that we all need to get to. So if any of you have any other questions, I'll be around a little bit, or I'll be setting this down as everyone's running to the other room, so happy to stay in the room for a bit as well. So thank you.